Hello everyone. Backwater Shop recently released this pattern and I thought it was so pretty, so I was going to make one and I was very excited when I found out that it required the Flag Day template that I got in one of my sew sampler box and that I already had the tool that I needed. So I wouldn't have to try to figure out how to make my own template or go out and buy one, but I will leave a link to it in the description box below if you are interested in buying one. So you need 13 different colors of fabric. I'm using a layer cake that I bought, Harvest Wishes. I'll leave a link to that as well. So I have 12 colors for my petals, and then I did choose one for my center. I did choose a darker one because that is what Kimberly did on her video and on her picture here, and I thought it was really nice. So I picked some lighter colors for my petals and then this darker pumpkin one for my center. So I'm going to see if I can make this look as good or at least half as good as she made hers look. I am using a layer cake, but this is actually perfect for a charm pack because you would need 5-inch squares to do each petal. But I wanted to do it in this fabric line and I already had this fabric, so why would I go and buy more if I already had what I need? So I'm just going to lay my template on here and I'm going to cut 2 layers of fabric at a time. That way I'm only cutting out my petals 6 times instead of 12. But you do whatever you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable with doing more than two, then go ahead and do so. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing more than one, then just do one. But I'm just going to be very careful here and try not to move my template at all. And I probably should have gotten my rotating cutting mat to do this. It would have made things a lot easier. And I've never cut a template before where I had so many little angled corners, but it turned out pretty good and it got easier with time. So I'm just going to finish cutting all of the rest of the petals and then we will move on to the next step. So once you have all of your petal pieces cut, you're just going to take one piece at a time. And then we need to fold them in half with right sides together. And we're just going to be very careful and make sure that everything is lined up nice and neat. I'm not going to press anything. I don't want to crease it or anything. I just want to have that fold there. You could pin it in place if you wanted to. I'm just going to use my Wonder Clips. I prefer to use these if I can. And then we're going to have to sew on all of these. So you can see that one end is very narrow and the other end is wider. And that is where we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. And we're just going to do the same thing to all of them. So I'm just going to fold them all in half and then put some clips in place. And this way I can take them all over to my sewing machine and I can chain stitch them. So I'm at the sewing machine and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on all of them. And I'm just going to chain stitch them just so that it goes a little bit faster. This pattern is so that you can make a pillow, but I'm going to use it as a table topper or I'm going to hang it on my wall. Maybe I'll make it so that I can use it for both. All right, now that we have sewn them, I've cut them all apart already. We need to clip that corner there by the fold. We just need to make sure that we don't cut into our stitch line. If we do that, it's going to unravel. So I'm just going to carefully clip all of my corners on them. And you just do that so that when you turn it the right way, that your corner is going to be a little bit crisper and you can get it to lay a little bit flatter. So I'm just going to turn this one the other way so you can see what it's supposed to look like. I'm going to use my finger a little bit, and if that doesn't work, you can use a tool. Just be careful not to stab into your fabric. And then this is what it's going to look like once you're done. So I'm just going to do that to the rest of them, and then we'll go over and press them. So when you're pressing these, I just opened this up with my fingers, and then I just gave it a finger press because this is a little bit awkward. And a smaller iron would probably definitely make this a lot easier. But I'm just going to use my finger to kind of give it a press and press that seam open. And then I'm going to take the tip of my iron and I'm just going to push it in there just to try to get it to lay nice and flat. Once I've done that, then I'm just going to turn it over and I'm going to do my best to make sure that that seam is down the center and then just kind of crease the edges before I hit it with some heat. And then once this is done, then you have one petal and then we're just going to do the same thing to all of the other ones and then we're going to start sewing them together. And if you like these kind of videos, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button. It really helps my channel. And also please consider subscribing to my channel for more videos on quilting and other quilty projects. So then once all of our petals are made and they have all been pressed, they're nice and flat, and you just want to lay them out in whichever order you want them to be. And then we're going to sew them together in sections of threes. This is just going to make it a lot easier than trying to sew it together in a whole row. So we'll do threes and then six, and then we'll sew those two halves together. So to do that, we're just going to take two of our petals and lay them right sides together, making sure that we're lining up all of our edges and that everything is lined up nicely. And if you sewed correctly and pressed properly, this should all line up nicely. And you could pin this in place here. But again, I'm just going to use my clips and I'm going to clip quite a few of them together and then take them over to the sewing machine and then sew them together. And I did take a picture of how I had them laid out so that if I got something mixed up, I would know where I had wanted which petal and I don't get it mixed up. And for these, when I'm sewing them, I am back stitching at the beginning and at the end, just that way if I end up tugging on it too much or something, when I'm appliquing it onto the background, then I don't end up ripping those stitches open. All right, now before I move on, I will iron this. So I just heat set my seams and then I just fold it over and then I'm going to press to one side. And I'm going to flip it over and then I'm going to press it open. I just find that it just works better if I press it to one side first and then press open. But we're just going to give them a good press and make sure that they're nice and flat. And I'm going to repeat that with all of them and then we can start sewing the next sections on. So now I'm just going to take the remaining petal from each section that I had because I had 4 sections of 3. I'm just going to line these all up and go sew them on and then turn those 4 sections into 2. So now I have 2 sections of 6 here. So I'm just going to lay them on right sides together. I am only going to sew one side at a time because if you try to do both, you might mess up the one side. It doesn't want to lay nice and flat if you try to do both at once. All right, so I have sewn it together and I have a petal here. And the center part is a little bit bunched, but that's okay. We'll deal with that later. So now it's time to make that center and you need a circle template, which I didn't have. So I just found a plate that was the closest I had to that size that I needed. And then you also need some sew in interfacing, which I didn't have. I had iron on interfacing. So I'm going to see if I can make it work with this. So I just used my plate and then I just trace a circle onto my interfacing. And I'm just going to pin these two together so I can cut them at the same time. And you're supposed to sew it a 1/4 inch from the edge, but because my plate was 1/2 inch bigger than what the template says, I'm going to sew 1/2 inch from the edge. Just that way it'll end up being the same size. So I'm just going to pin these together and I'm just going to use a pair of scissors to cut them apart. And this way, if I do it like this, they're both the exact same size and I don't have to worry about one being a little bit bigger or a little bit off. These will be the exact same size and it should work a little bit better. And then hopefully this is going to work with my iron-on interfacing because I won't be able to press it until I'm ready to applique it onto my background. And here it looks like I'm going fast, but I'm actually going really slow. I'm not a fan of sewing in circles. So here I'm going to be trimming off some of the extra and I am going to use my pinking shears because I find that if you're doing anything circular and you use pinking shears, it's going to lay flatter. So hopefully this is going to work out because I can't iron it until I need to applique it. So you just need to take these 2 layers and you need to pull them apart because we need to cut a slit on the interfacing. This is going to be so that we can turn it right side out. And you want to make sure that you're not accidentally cutting into the outer fabric because, well, then you would have a hole. But I have it folded in half here and it says to cut about 2 inches. So I'm just going to cut about an inch down and then that should give me my 2 inches that I need. And then we just want to carefully reach into that opening and then we want to pull our outer layer through. This is just going to turn everything right side out. And I'm just being careful here not to rip anything and using my fingers to try to get that edge to lay as flat as possible and using a pin if I needed to. But I think it actually turned out pretty good and it's actually laying pretty flat. So I have that already. I got the bumpy side where I needed it. So I sewed that all together right. But I did end up double checking it and then there was some spots where I wasn't 100% happy with the way the seam was laying. So I just grabbed a pin and then I just used that to carefully pull that seam out so that I could get it to lay even flatter. All right, now it's time to put this all on the background. So I've cut the background piece according to the pattern measurements and it says to fold it in half and then in half again and then just to do a finger press to give it a crease. And these are going to be our guides on placing our flower petals so that we get it as centered as possible. So once we have our creases there, we're just going to lay our petals on top and then we're just going to match up 4 points so that it's all centered and looks nice and even. And then we're just going to put some pins in, being careful not to tug on it too much, but just a little bit to get it to lay nice and flat. The center area does not lay flat when you're doing this, and I rewatched Kimberly's video from Fat Quarter Shop, and she said that it's okay, it'll work out in the end. But we are ready to applique this, so we're going to do the petals first, and then we will add our center. And to applique it, there's different ways to do it. I will be hand sewing it. I'm just going to use a needle and thread, just a single thread, and then I'm using an Oriful 50 weight thread. I just recently bought some Oriful thread and I've heard a lot of good stuff about it and I was just like, man, can it really be that good? And it is. I like Oriful thread. But anyways, I'm going to hand sew this the same way I would hand sew my binding. So just coming in from the back side of the fabric and just taking a little bite of my petal there and just pulling the thread through and then going straight down, going slightly underneath the petal and then picking up some of that backing fabric. And then when I come back up, I'm just going to take a little bite of that petal again, and this is going to secure everything to the backing. And I hope that makes sense. My hand sewing is not the best. I am still pretty new at it actually, but I prefer the look. And I'm hoping that I'm making sense and that you can see what I'm doing here. But you could do this with a sewing machine. You could just do a straight stitch right along the edge, or you could do a blanket stitch. It's entirely up to you. So I have all of my petals appliqued down, so I am ready to take these pins out. And surprisingly, I did not stab myself once. It was really shocking. Okay, I am ready to put my flower center on, and because I have that iron-on interfacing, I'm not going to bother pinning it. I'm just going to lay it on there, and then I'm just going to do my very best to center it, and I'm going to make sure that it's as centered as possible. So I'm just using a ruler, and then I'm just double checking and triple checking and checking constantly because I want to make sure that it's as centered as possible before I iron it down. Then once I have it where I think it's good, I'm just going to iron it down a little bit, and then I will go and hand sew it on the same way I did the petals. And here we go. I have it all appliqued on there. It is ready for some quilting. You can't even really see any of the stitches, and that's what I wanted. I wanted it to look like that. And I think I'm going to make this a table topper, but I'm going to put some hanging corners on there so that I can hang it on the wall when I want to. And I think this would be a really cute decor thing for fall. So I will leave a link to the pattern in the description box below. And that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time.